At 2:47 in the afternoon, a burst of orange flame erupted in the center of Hudson Trust Bank's grand lobby, startling every customer around, and in just a few brief seconds, a check worth $2,347,000 was reduced to ash before dozens of witnesses. Bradley Cole, his face flushed with smug triumph, gripped a silver lighter like a badge of righteousness as bits of scorched paper drifted through the air, while Jordan Harris, a 48-year-old black man in a worn grey hoodie, stood completely still, unmoving, as if every insult slid off him without leaving a single mark. No one understood why he didn't react. They only saw those deep, steady eyes of his, calm and unmoving like a silent lake before a storm. The polished marble floor reflected the blaze, making the moment feel even more brutal, and the sharp crackling of the burning paper echoed so clearly it sent a chill down spines. Bradley slammed the heel of his Italian leather shoe onto the pile of ash and twisted it as if grinding out some invisible crime. Problem solved, he declared, his voice ringing with arrogance, as though he had just accomplished something heroic. Phones immediately shot up. A blonde woman named Ashley Cooper whispered, "Oh my God," before continuing her live stream, her eyes gleaming like she had just captured a scene from an expensive movie. Security guard Tom Jenkins, a large man pushing 45, pressed a hand to his radio and reported fraud suspect with a fake check. Evidence destroyed. Every syllable cut through the thick air of prejudice, feeding the judgmental stares, now locked onto Jordan as though he were a criminal who had just been exposed. An older woman, dressed in a premium Chanel suit, Margaret Lewis, even clapped politely, as if rewarding Bradley for keeping the community safe. Nearby, a middle-aged businessman in a Brooks Brothers suit nodded approvingly and murmured, "Should have done that from the start." These contemptuous looks, whispered remarks, and probing stares didn't come out of nowhere. They had been simmering since the moment Jordan walked into the bank, wearing old clothes, slightly dusty white sneakers, and a simple appearance that made people instantly assume he was untrustworthy. But the spark that set the lobby ablaze with indignation wasn't his outfit. It was the enormous amount written on the check he presented, an amount people like them believed someone like him could never legitimately possess. Jordan remained where he stood, those dark, fathomless eyes, unblinking in the firelight and humiliation. Inside him a strange silence spread, not fear, but a cold, razor-sharp calm that made onlookers uneasy. He could smell the acrid burn in his lungs, but not a single muscle in his face moved. Something inside him, a door long closed, was opening just a crack. Anyone standing close enough would have noticed his hand tighten for a brief moment before he released it again. Not because he was powerless, but because he knew he did not need to defend himself. Bradley kept performing, kicking the ashes again, savoring every second of cruelty. A fake check worth $2 million, pathetic. "He must think we're idiots," he sneered. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Tom planted himself beside Jordan, one hand on his radio, the other hovering close to his restraint hold, ready to act. But as Bradley lifted his chin in victory, Jordan glanced at the Swiss watch hidden beneath his hoodie sleeve. The second hand glided across the dial, reflecting a sharp white light. 13 minutes remained until the board meeting. 13 minutes before this entire room would be forced to confront the truth. A truth that, if Jordan spoke it now, would make every insult they had hurled recoil on them like acid. But he didn't speak. He didn't need to. Jordan's silence became a challenge, a brutal question pressed against the chests of everyone mocking him. What if you're wrong, but no one paused to consider it? Prejudice convinces people they are always right. Arrogance teaches them to belittle others based on skin color, clothing, or quietness. Bradley squinted at Jordan, searching for fear or despair in his eyes, and found none. That absence irritated him. "Look at it," he barked. "That's the worth of your lies." Jordan still didn't look. A young customer stepped closer, live streaming on TikTok, breathless with excitement. "Guys, this is insane. $2 million burned like scrap paper. Views skyrocketed. Comments flooded in. Jordan heard his phone buzzing in his pocket, call after call he was deliberately ignoring. His face stayed calm, but deep in his chest, his heartbeat had shifted not from fear, but because this moment, as brutal as it was, struck like a bullet into an old wound. A wound from every time he had been told he wasn't worth enough, wasn't deserving enough, wasn't powerful enough. And in that instant, a thought moved through his mind, cold as steel. They have no idea what they just burned. It took Bradley a while to notice the faint smile flickering on Jordan's lips, a smile so small most people would have missed it, but enough to make Bradley's skin prickle. It wasn't the smile of someone enduring humiliation. It wasn't an apology. It was the smile of a man who knew something the rest of the room did not. A dangerous smile. And then, in a space tightening with arrogance and ignorance, Jordan lifted his chin slightly, his gaze locking onto Bradley with a calm so sharp it bordered on terrifying. Now then, let's see who truly doesn't belong here. In that moment, no one in the lobby realized that the very minute they laughed at him would become the moment they paid the highest price of their lives. And the pile of ashes under Bradley's shoe, the one he believed was proof of his victory, was in fact only the beginning of a reversal none of them could imagine. Because they burned the check. But what they didn't know was that he was the owner of the entire bank. The real storm didn't begin with the dying flames cooling on the marble floor, but with the way the crowd ignited as if they had been handed a stage to unleash all their prejudice at once. Phones shot upward. LED lights flashed non-stop live-stream audio, blended with cruel whispers, creating a chaotic noise that was messy, yet thrilling for those feeding on it. Ashley Cooper tilted her phone, bringing the camera close to the smoldering ashes, her voice rising with excitement. "Do you guys see this? $2 million burned right inside the bank. Oh my God, this is going viral." Margaret Lewis, standing near the investment desk like an unforgiving judge of the upper class, added a comment that made the air even more toxic. "Good. We need someone like Mr. Bradley to maintain standards. We cannot let just anyone walk into a place this upscale." Another man in a three-piece suit nodded along, looking at Jordan as though he were a stain that somehow slipped into their polished world. Each of their words struck like a hammer, hitting the ground, relentless, cold, stripped of humanity. Jordan heard everything. He didn't flinch. He didn't show pain. But inside him, every word carved itself in like a dull blade, reopening old memories. Security guard Tom Jenkins stepped closer, his broad shoulders casting a heavy shadow over Jordan, a shadow meant to crush rather than protect. "You will stand right here until we complete verification," Tom said, in a tone that allowed no negotiation. It didn't sound like an announcement. It sounded like a sentence. Jordan offered only the slightest nod, so subtle it was almost invisible. In that single moment, every breath he took felt steady, yet weighed down like a stone pressing against his chest. Right then, a 19-year-old girl with purple hair named Lily Carter lifted her phone, and went live on TikTok, her voice trembling with excitement. "Guys, I'm at Hudson Trust Bank. Right now, the manager burned a black man's check. Things are getting absolutely insane." Viewers jumped from 47 to 300 in seconds as comments flooded in. "This manager is a legend. Scammer met the right guy today. Who brings $1 million check looking like that?" The comments scrolled too fast for eyes to catch, but Jordan skimmed enough to feel one thing clearly. This entire little world inside the lobby was united in its humiliation of him. Encouraged by the crowd, Bradley only performed harder. He straightened his tie, smoothed his perfectly gelled brown hair, and circled Jordan like a judge waiting for a defendant to beg for mercy. He thought he could fool us with a check that looks real. "I'm doing this for the safety of the bank," he shouted, making sure the spectators heard every word. His voice echoed across the spacious room, bouncing off stone columns like metal striking metal. Jordan remained still, but his eyes began to shift. They no longer held the silence of someone being humiliated, but the silence of someone assessing someone, observing someone preparing to decide how the game would end. It was the kind of look that would make sharp people uneasy, but unfortunately for him, Bradley was not the sharp type. He saw only what he wanted to see, a quiet man alone, unresisting. "Tell me," Bradley said, stepping in close and lowering himself to Jordan's eye level, "what's your real name? Or are you planning to give us a fake one like that fake check?" Jordan lifted his gaze. The instant their eyes met, time tightened into half a second, but long enough for Jordan to see the poison running through Bradley's stare, not suspicion, but deliberate contempt. Ashley caught the moment on her live stream and squealed, "Oh my God, everyone!" The manager just asked his name. "This is getting crazy," Margaret chimed in again. "If he had real money, he wouldn't be dressed like that. Truly wealthy people don't look like this." That comment sliced the air open. Jordan took a slow breath, feeling every layer of prejudice crash onto him like freezing hail. The air thickened around him, heavy, as if the entire lobby was trying to corner him, trying to crush his calm. But Jordan only checked his watch. 2:51 in the afternoon. 9 minutes left. A sharp, cold laugh cut through the room. Bradley bent down, picked up a fragment of the burned check, held it up for the crowd, and shouted, This is what he thought could fool us!" Then he dropped it and blew on it, letting it vanish into dust right in front of Jordan. The scene erupted in laughter and cheers as if they were reenacting a viral video and knew their lines by heart. But amid that noise, Jordan suddenly felt something shift inside him, not an explosion, but a settling, a frightening stillness, like a lake after the storm has passed its surface, too calm warning that the true danger is still beneath. The more they humiliated him, the more certain he became of his choice. He thought about the emergency board meeting, scheduled for 3 o'clock, the meeting he would be leading. He thought about how the truth would unfold with one simple action. And when Tom signaled for the second guard to block the door, Jordan let out a small, razor-sharp smile, so slight, yet sharp enough to make Tom freeze for half a second. No one in that crowd knew they were standing inside a story whose ending had been written long before they gathered here, an ending only they were unaware of. They laughed because they thought they were watching a nobody being humiliated. They didn't know they were watching a mistake worth someone's entire career reputation and future someone named Bradley Cole. They didn't understand that Jordan's silence wasn't weakness, but the patience of a man holding absolute power over what came next. And they had no idea that in just a few more minutes, this entire bank lobby would become living proof of a lesson. None of them wanted to learn. A wrong assumption can burn far more than a check. It can burn a person's whole life. The air inside Hudson Trust Bank grew heavier by the second, like a cramped room, packed tight with arrogance, prejudice, and the vicious excitement of a crowd hungry for humiliation. Jordan remained seated on the leather bench, hands resting on his knees, shoulders relaxed to an unbelievable degree, as if he were the only person in the room, untouched by the chaos swallowing everyone else. That calmness only made Bradley Cole angrier. He wanted to see Jordan break, lash out, panic. That unshakable composure felt like a silent slap to his face, pushing him to escalate the humiliation even further. "Give me your wallet," Bradley ordered, and before Jordan could react, he yanked the leather wallet straight from his hand. The movement was so quick that several people in the lobby flinched. Security guard Tom nodded in approval, not seeing it as a violation at all. Bradley opened the wallet right there in front of everyone, flipping through each compartment and holding up the cards as if unveiling evidence of a crime. "Look at this, a black credit card. Who would issue one of these to someone dressed like a homeless man?" He burst out laughing, and a few customers laughed with him, as if they were watching cheap comedy, and worse because they believed they had the right to laugh at him. Jordan watched the scene unfold, his heart tightening for a brief beat, though his expression remained unchanged. He had lived through this before when he was younger, applying for jobs being refused service, at restaurants being stopped on the street for looking suspicious. The only difference now was that these people had stumbled onto the weakest point of every prejudiced person, their blind confidence. Bradley picked up Jordan's heavy American Express Centurion card and held it under the lights, flipping it like he expected it to turn into a plastic toy. Stolen, obviously. "Did you really think something this fake would fool me?" Jordan lifted his head and met Bradley's stare. Later, Bradley would remember this moment for the rest of his life, the look that held no anger and no fear, just the quiet certainty of a man who knew something his accuser did not. "You should return my wallet," Jordan said, his voice low and soft, but not weak. "The police will want to know how you took it." Bradley barked out a jagged, bitter laugh. "Oh, now you're threatening me. You think I'm stupid." The entire lobby erupted in laughter again. The sound was so sharp and overwhelming, it felt like pieces of the air were striking Jordan's skin. But he simply glanced at the clock. 2:56 in the afternoon. 4 minutes before everything turned. Ashley zoomed the camera on his face, squealing, "He's still calm, everyone." "Oh my God, this is peak drama." A young man nearby scoffed. "He's planning to run. Look at him, checking the time non-stop." But Jordan wasn't running. They were the ones digging their own graves. Bradley jerked his chin at the second guard. "Block the door. I don't want him slipping out." The guard, a 30-year-old man named Reed Dawson, stepped over and stood at the exit like a living barrier. Jordan observed the motion and let out a faint breath, a tired exhale shaped by 3 decades of watching people cling proudly to the worst versions of themselves. Then his phone buzzed again. This time the screen stayed lit long enough for someone nearby to catch a glimpse of the message: emergency board meeting, 3 o'clock. Chairman required. The young office worker paused, eyebrows tightening, as he glanced at Jordan, then Bradley, then back at the phone. He sensed something was off, but before he could say a word, Bradley snapped, "Turn that off. Your accomplices can wait." Jordan ignored him and simply dismissed the notification. Across the room, Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old teller who had been quietly observing, began to feel uneasy. She kept looking from Jordan to his wallet, to the expensive watch, peeking from under his sleeve. She had served thousands of clients in the last 5 years, and every instinct she had was screaming that something about Bradley's assumptions was very wrong. She approached and whispered, "Mr. Bradley, maybe we should double-check the information." Bradley cut her off instantly. "Sarah, I've been doing this longer than you've been in banking. Don't interfere." Sarah stepped back unsettled. His arrogance chilled her. Meanwhile, Lily stood near the withdrawal counter, her eyes glued to her phone. "Oh my God," she whispered, "the live stream just hit 1,000 viewers." Right then, Bradley picked up a small flake of scorched check from the floor and shoved it close to Jordan's face, forcing him to look. "I want you to see this," he hissed. "This is your real worth. Ashes. Fraud." Jordan's fingers tensed for the briefest moment. A small movement, but it let the silence inside him deepen further. And then, like a needle bursting an overinflated balloon, his calm shifted into something sharper, something colder. He tilted his head slightly, and his eyes hardened, turning from quiet into steel. A single look that made Bradley lose half a breath. "You're very confident in your judgment," Jordan said slowly. "Have you ever been afraid you might be wrong?" The question dropped like a stone into still water. Everything froze for half a second. Then Bradley burst out laughing. "Me wrong in the bank that I manage. Don't forget you're the one sitting while I'm standing." Jordan didn't reply. He simply placed both hands on the armrests and leaned forward slightly as if preparing to rise. A small gesture, but one that carried weight. Tom immediately tightened his grip on his radio. Reed blocked the exit fully. Ashley pushed her camera closer, and the crowd inched forward, hungry for the climax. None of them knew that Jordan's slight forward movement would become the lightning bolt that split open Bradley's arrogance in the very next moment. But Jordan knew, because he checked his watch one last time. 2:59 in the afternoon. 1 minute before the truth dropped on this room like a verdict no one could appeal. And then he stood. Slow, steady, unshakably calm. His gaze swept across Bradley one final time, as if warning him that the real storm was only beginning. And the clueless crowd, the ones laughing because they believed they stood with the powerful, had only 60 seconds left to realize they had chosen the wrong side from the very start. Because what they believed was power was nothing but an illusion. And the man they thought insignificant was the very storm waiting for the exact second to sweep them all away. The moment Jordan rose to his feet, the entire bank lobby seemed to stretch tight beneath an invisible force. No one breathed loudly, no one spoke up, but every eye locked onto him, as if they had just witnessed prey turning to face its hunter. Bradley Cole shifted back half a step, not out of fear, but out of shock. Jordan didn't cower the way he expected, didn't apologize, didn't defend himself, didn't even flare with anger. He simply stood upright like a stone pillar that had endured countless blows and was now shifting ever so slightly into its true position. "Sit down," Bradley barked, his voice cracking before he steadied it again, emboldened by the live stream view count climbing behind him. "I said sit down." Tom Jenkins stepped forward, one hand resting on his baton eyes, sharp with suspicion. Reed Dawson stayed planted at the door, his posture ready to lunge and restrain Jordan at any second. Jordan didn't react. He simply slipped a hand into his coat pocket, slowly, deliberately, as if to show he meant no harm. Even that small motion made Tom snap. "Do not take anything out of your pocket. I'm only retrieving what belongs to me," Jordan replied, Not looking at Tom, not looking at Bradley, but staring straight ahead, as if he were walking into another realm entirely, a level of reality none of them had ever accessed. He pulled out nothing dangerous, nothing suspicious, nothing forged, just a pristine white business card with thin silver trim and raised black lettering so sharp the overhead lights shimmered across its surface. He placed it gently on the marble counter, where the ashes of the burned check still clung, then turned it toward Bradley. The simplicity of the gesture silenced the entire lobby. Bradley narrowed his eyes and jerked his chin, signaling Tom to pick it up. But Tom had already seen the text from where he stood, and his eyes widened uncontrollably. He swallowed hard, and the steady hands of a former police officer trembled for a split second. Ashley zoomed in close on the card, her live stream voice cracking. Wait, do you guys see this? Oh my God. Annoyed, Bradley snatched the card from Tom before he could utter a word. He looked down. The print was unmistakable, undeniable. Jordan Harris, Chairman, and Chief Executive Officer, Harris Capital Group, Bradley, let out a laugh, sharp and panicked, wrapped in a shell of arrogance. Please, you think anyone is falling for this? Anyone can print cards like this at a shop, $5 for a whole stack. But the laugh didn't reach his eyes. Sweat began to bead along his temples. Jordan's silence, the silence that never begged and never defended, rattled him more than shouting ever could. Jordan reached into his pocket again. This time no one protested. The entire room stood frozen, mesmerized. He pulled out a sleek tablet, its metal edges cold, its black screen deep like a door waiting to be opened. Jordan set it on the counter, pressed the power button, and the screen lit up, casting a pale blue glow across the stunned faces watching him. With calm, practiced motions, he opened Hudson Trust Bank's internal system. A new gateway appeared. Board member portal authorized access. Only Bradley's mouth fell open, while every person in the lobby held their breath. Jordan entered the passcode without hesitation, without pausing the way a person unlocks their own device, because it was. In less than 2 seconds, the screen displayed internal files stamped with the bank's logo and security seal. Jordan Harris, principal shareholder, 73% ownership. Position, chairman of the board of directors. Security clearance level, 10 full executive access. A sharp clatter broke the silence. Tom's radio hitting the marble floor. No one picked it up. Sarah Mitchell lifted a hand to her mouth and took a shaky step back, her eyes wide, as if the world she knew had flipped inside out. Reed Dawson, blocking the exit, began to tremble slightly, suddenly unsure who he was supposed to be restraining. Bradley stumbled back, lips dry, voice splintering. This has to be fake. You hacked the system. I will. But Jordan turned the tablet so the crowd could see before Bradley could finish the sentence. The live stream histogram spiked wildly viewership, jumping from 2,000 to 4,500, then 6,000 in seconds. No one laughed anymore. Not a single jeer. Nobody dared speak. They stood silent, unwilling witnesses, trapped inside a disaster they could no longer escape. You burned my check, Jordan said, his voice calm, almost conversational. That quarterly dividend, your bank pays it to me. Every word sliced cleanly through Bradley's illusion of authority. No, this can't. Bradley backed up another step, his hands clenching around the flecks of ash on his shoe, as if grasping at something to keep him from sinking. But there was nothing left to hold on to. Jordan swiped to another page. Internal financial statements, stamped reports board resolutions. You just burned $2,347,000 of my dividend, he said, in the middle of the bank that I own. A choked sound escaped someone in the crowd. No one knew if it was shock, fear, or regret. Sarah whispered. Dear God, live stream comments exploded. No way this is real. The manager is done. Plot twist of the year. He burned the boss's check. Sweat rolled down Bradley's face in thick drops. No one can prove it's real. Jordan opened one more file. Bradley Cole's own employee record. Annual salary $127,000, position branch manager, supervisor, regional director, Anna Whitfield, employed since 2018. The lobby erupted, not in laughter, but in horrified murmurs. Every single person understood the truth. Now the man they had cheered for, the man they praised, the man they live-streamed as he humiliated another human being, was not a hero protecting the bank. He was a mid-level employee insulting his own employer, and Jordan knew it too. He tilted his head slightly and looked directly at Bradley, his eyes calm and deep like a dark canyon. Now, he said slowly, we will have a real conversation. And for the first time in his life, Bradley realized he was not standing in the position of power. He was the one being dragged into the light, stripped of arrogance, forced to face a truth he had tried to burn into ashes. But ashes cannot hide power, and power was standing directly in front of him, flesh and blood in the form of the man he had just disrespected most. The atmosphere inside Hudson Trust Bank shifted from chaotic noise to a suffocating silence, as if even the air molecules were afraid to move and break a moment too overwhelming to process. There were no more laughs, no more mocking remarks, no more cheers of scammer caught red-handed, like just minutes earlier. Now there was only the sharp breathing of people realizing they had cheered for the wrong side, and the pounding hearts of those who had been so confident in their own cruel assumptions. Bradley Cole stood frozen still, holding the business card he had mocked. But it was no longer the flimsy illusion he thought it was. It was a blade, cold and deadly, sliding slowly from his throat into his chest. His own name was displayed clearly in the internal HR system Jordan had shown to the entire lobby. Not Kyle, not Mike, not anyone else. It was Bradley Cole, branch manager, a subordinate in the very institution where Jordan Harris owned 73% of the shares. This was no longer a joke, no longer a personal interpretation. It was embedded in internal data, certified, documented, stamped. And in that instant, even the most skeptical person in the room could no longer deny the obvious truth. Jordan had the authority to dismiss Bradley with a single tap of his finger on that tablet. Jordan scanned the room slowly, his gaze sweeping across every soul shrinking beneath the weight of a truth none of them had been prepared to face. When he finally looked back at Bradley, his eyes held no rage, no bitterness, only disappointment. A disappointment so deep it made heads bow. You just burned $2,347,000 of mine, Jordan said, his voice dropping low, each word knocking against the air like a gavel. You burned it without verifying. You burned it to show power, a power that never belonged to you. Bradley gasped, his throat tightening, as if something inside was being crushed. No, I only did what you thought was right. Jordan finished soft but cutting, not based on policy, not based on procedure, but based on prejudice. Behind the counter, Sarah Mitchell stood pale as paper. She had seen customer complaints, conflicts, even outbursts, but never a bank employee burning a legitimate check belonging to the chairman who owned the institution. A young man who had been live streaming moments earlier now covered his mouth, stepping back as if he had just witnessed a car crash. Ashley Cooper was still filming, but her voice shook uncontrollably. "Everyone, this is beyond drama, I think. I think this is federal-level destruction of financial documents." That was when Jordan turned the tablet to the next page, an internal legal analysis pulled directly from the bank's system, citing federal statutes on the destruction of financial instruments. "Let me remind you," Bradley Jordan said, his voice stripped of emotion, leaving only truth. "Knowingly destroying valid financial documents, especially high-value checks, is a federal crime under Sections 1341 and 1519 of the United States Criminal Code." He read each word with surgical precision, as if draining the breath from Bradley's chest. "Penalties can reach up to 20 years in prison." A few people gasped. A middle-aged woman whispered, "Dear God," Tom Jenkins stood completely still, his eyes wide. He had taken part in many detentions during his security career, but never had he stood in a situation where he had chosen the wrong side so blatantly. Reed Dawson, the guard blocking the exit, swallowed hard and quietly stepped aside, as if proving he had no intention of obstructing the man before him ever again. Bradley began to tremble. His entire body shook. The same hands that had slammed tables, snatched Jordan's wallet, waved ashes in his face, now shook so violently that the business card slipped from his grip and fell onto the marble floor, flipping over like a verdict already written. "I didn't know. Not knowing does not remove responsibility," Jordan replied. "You more than anyone had the duty to handle a high-value transaction correctly." He glanced down at the burnt ashes. "But you didn't. Because you didn't think I was worth verifying." A crack seemed to open in the collective mind of the witnesses. A black man in a hoodie walked into a bank. A large check. A white manager confident he was doing the right thing. And all of them, every single person, had jumped in, behind him without evidence, without procedure, based on one thing, their assumption about another human being's worth. Jordan looked at them, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the gaze of a mirror, showing them exactly who they were. "Do you understand? Jordan said that the check you burned could have funded scholarships, small business loans, and community projects that this bank claims to support." He drew in a deep breath. "But because you didn't like how I dressed, you burned opportunities for countless people." Bradley collapsed into a chair, his face as grey as ash. "Jordan?" He managed to whisper Jordan's name, clinging to it like a lifeline. "I'm sorry. It's not time for apologies," Jordan cut in. "Before you apologize, you need to face the truth." He turned the tablet again, showing the revenue reports for the entire Hudson Trust Bank system. Last year, this bank generated $847 million in revenue. $623 million of that came from investments funding and operational support provided by Harris Capital Group. A heavy murmur rolled through the lobby. The looks now fixed on Jordan held no prejudice, no mockery, only awe. Bradley's lips moved, but no sound came out. Jordan continued, "I never walk into a branch announcing, 'I'm the chairman.' I dress simply. I wait in line like everyone else. I do that because I want to see how employees treat their customers." He paused. "And today you showed me." The entire lobby fell completely silent. Jordan stood there, not wielding power as a weapon, but presenting it as an undeniable fact. "Now," he said, "we begin addressing the consequences." And from that moment on, no one, not even Bradley Cole, dared breathe too loudly, because they all understood the fall of a man was about to happen right here, right now, in broad daylight. And the person delivering that judgment wasn't rage, but justice itself, embodied in the very man they had underestimated most. The entire Hudson Trust Bank lobby stood frozen like stone when Jordan Harris gently closed the tablet and placed it on the marble counter with a soft but razor-sharp click, the sound of a referee setting down the final piece on a chessboard. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone understood that this moment wasn't just a climax, it was a verdict. Jordan looked directly at Bradley Cole, his gaze sharp but not vicious cold, but not cruel, simply the gaze of a man about to deliver a decision that could never be undone. "You know something," Bradley Jordan said, his voice unnervingly calm, as if he were discussing an investment project rather than the destruction of a financial instrument belonging to the very owner of the bank. People often believe power belongs to the loudest voice in the room, but in reality, power belongs to the person who doesn't need to raise his voice at all. He paused, letting the words sink into every bowed head. "And I am that person." Bradley swallowed hard. His face had drained of color, sweat gathered at his hairline, and his mouth hung open without producing a single sound. What he thought was a stage to flaunt his authority had turned out to be a hole he had dug for himself and jumped into. Jordan stood tall hands behind his back, his posture calm, but carrying the weight of the entire institution he represented. "Now then," Jordan said, "it's time for you to hear your options." The crowd leaned forward, terrified of missing even a single word. Lily Carter slowly lowered her phone, though the live stream continued with thousands watching. Ashley Cooper held her breath. Margaret Lewis stared at her shoes, unable to meet any eyes. Tom Jenkins stood stiffly, sweat rolling down his temple. And Reed Dawson had already stepped far back, like a soldier realizing he had stood on the wrong battlefield. Jordan raised a single finger, his eyes locked on Bradley. "Option 1, he said clearly. "You will apologize publicly. To me, to every witness in this room, and to the thousands watching live." Bradley flinched as if struck. Jordan continued. "After that, you will accept a demotion from branch manager to assistant branch manager. Your salary will be reduced by 40%. A ripple of shock traveled through the crowd like waves hitting rock. No one expected the consequences to fall this swiftly or this sharply. But Jordan wasn't finished. "You will reimburse $50,000 in damages for today's incident. And you will complete 200 hours of community service at the Southside Financial Assistance Center every weekend." Bradley's eyes widened, his lips trembling. 200 hours, he stuttered. Jordan didn't blink. "Yes. 200 hours. You will personally provide financial counseling to the same type of families you called those people today. And you will learn to see human beings with basic respect." The room felt like it had been drained of air. But Jordan still wasn't done. He lowered his voice, another register, an undertone so cold it sent a shiver down Bradley's spine. "All of that will include a permanent disciplinary mark in your employee file, and you will be placed under direct oversight from the chairman's office for 1 full year." Jordan raised his hand slowly. "That is option 1, the difficult road, but a road that might make you a better man." Then he lowered it. "Now for option 2. Every person in the room held their breath. Some covered their mouths. Some looked at Bradley with pity. Some, like Margaret, shook with the realization that they had cheered for a man now standing on the edge of ruin. Jordan spoke deliberately, each word like a weight dropped onto stone. "You will be terminated immediately for cause." Bradley jerked, gripping the counter to stay upright. Jordan continued, "You will lose all benefits, including retirement, and your case will be forwarded to the Department of Justice for review of federal charges related to the destruction of a valid financial instrument." A strangled gasp escaped someone. Jordan's voice stayed steady. "The maximum sentence is 20 years. Bradley nearly collapsed. Jordan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a quiet blade. "Additionally, I will file a report with the National Banking Association. That will end your banking career permanently. No financial institution will ever hire you again. Your name will be tied to today's incident for the rest of your life." Jordan paused, then delivered the finishing cut. "And do not forget the wallet you took from me is still in your coat pocket. You took it in front of dozens of witnesses and security cameras. That is theft of personal property." Bradley gasped, his hand trembling as it brushed over his pocket, as if it were on fire. Jordan straightened his expression, carrying more sorrow than anger, a sorrow reserved for people who let their own arrogance destroy their future. "That is option 2, Jordan said. "The fast path, the short path, and the darkest one." He stepped back, arms folded. "Now, Bradley Cole, you have 60 seconds to choose." The world froze. 60 seconds felt like 60 years. The live stream crossed 8,000 viewers. Every gaze locked onto Bradley, the man who moments ago stood on the throne of arrogance, now trembling like a leaf in a storm. He opened his mouth. Jordan lifted his hand. 50 seconds. Bradley swallowed. "I choose 40 seconds, Jordan said coldly. Bradley looked around him. No one stood with him. Not Tom, not Reed, not Margaret. None of the customers who applauded him minutes earlier. No one. All he saw in their eyes now was fear, fear of becoming him, fear of being the next lesson. "I choose," he whispered, voice cracking apart, option 1. Jordan nodded once, small but final. "Good," he said. "That is the choice of a man who wants to make things right." And in that moment, the fate of Bradley Cole, the man who once stood triumphantly over the ashes he created, was rewritten not by fire, but by justice. The entire Hudson Trust Bank lobby stood frozen as Jordan Harris softly closed the tablet and set it on the marble counter with a sharp, deliberate click, like a referee placing the final stone on a chessboard. No one spoke. No one dared move. Everyone understood that this moment was not just a climax, it was a sentence. Jordan looked at Bradley Cole, his gaze sharp, but not vicious cold, but not cruel, simply the gaze of a man about to deliver a decision that couldn't be undone. "Begin." Jordan said, his voice, not loud, but heavy enough to pin the entire room in place. Bradley swallowed hard, then turned toward the phones recording him, toward the faces filled with fear and self-disgust for having cheered for the wrong side. His lips trembled as he tried to speak. He stopped. 1 second. 2 seconds, as if his throat had seized shut. But Jordan did not rush him. Lessons that matter need silence to take root. Finally, Bradley inhaled deeply and spoke in a cracked voice. "I, Bradley Cole, apologize." He swallowed hard, tears shining at the corners of his eyes. "I apologize to Mr. Jordan Harris for discrimination, humiliation, and destroying property belonging to the chairman of this bank." A few sharp exhales sounded across the room, as though someone had finally released the weight crushing their chest. Bradley continued, voice trembling, "But clear I was wrong. I let prejudice blind me. I used my authority the wrong way. I acted disgracefully and did not deserve the position I was given. Then he turned to the customers. And I apologize to everyone here for turning this place, which should serve customers with respect, into a stage to satisfy my ego. He looked straight into the live stream camera, not to perform, not to boast, but to face the truth. I apologize to everyone watching live. What I did was shameful. I will take responsibility for all of it. When his final words fell, the lobby did not cheer, did not clap, did not make a sound. Because this was not a triumphant ending. This was a human being facing himself. Jordan nodded once, marking the end of the first part of the sentence. "Good," he said. "Now for the next step." He turned to Sarah Mitchell, the only one who had held on to clarity from beginning to end. "Sarah, prepare the new contract for Bradley Assistant Branch Manager, adjusted salary, a $50,000 penalty, 200 hours of community service." Sarah nodded so fast she almost dropped her pen, then hurried to her computer, fingers trembling but focused. As she typed, Jordan continued, "And starting today, the Manhattan branch of Hudson Trust Bank will implement a new standard system. Phones rose again, this time not to mock, but to record change in real time." Jordan opened the tablet and scrolled to a document prepared long before this chaotic afternoon, though no one expected it to be announced here. First, Jordan said, his voice steady and resonant, "Every customer entering this bank will be treated with equal respect, regardless of clothing, skin color, or any personal bias." A soft wave of murmurs spread not disagreement, but recognition of how wrong they had all been. Second, Jordan continued, "All customer interactions will be recorded and reviewed monthly by an independent civil rights organization. The new system is called the Respect Monitor System. Anyone showing discriminatory behavior, no matter how small, will be investigated." Tom and Reed swallowed hard at the same moment. Third, mandatory quarterly training. Unconscious bias, customer dignity, service ethics, topics Bradley had likely signed off on without ever reflecting on them. Jordan walked toward the ashes of the burned check, crouched down, and scooped a small amount into his palm. Fourth, he said, an anonymous feedback system, a kiosk right here, a hotline straight to my office. If anyone feels mistreated, they will speak and we will listen. He stood ash resting in his palm. And finally, he turned to Sarah. "We will install a glass display in the lobby, a plaque titled, 'The Cost of Assumptions.' Inside will be the ashes of this check." The room held its breath, "to remind us all that one wrong judgment, one moment of disrespect, can destroy opportunities for many more people than we realize." In that moment, Jordan was no longer just a CEO. He was the voice of millions of people who had been looked at with suspicion because of their clothes, their status, or the color of their skin. Bradley stood there, eyes red, unable to speak. No one pitied him, but everyone understood he was learning a lesson most people spend their lives avoiding. When Sarah brought the new contract and placed it on the desk, Jordan said only one word: "Sign." Bradley signed. His hand shook. The ink smeared slightly. But it was the most honest signature of his life. When he finished, Jordan calmly retrieved his wallet from Bradley's coat pocket. "Thank you for returning it," Jordan said, not mocking, simply stating a truth. In that moment, Bradley bowed his head, not out of fear of Jordan, but because for the first time in his life, he understood what real respect was. Jordan turned back to the lobby, his voice ringing like the conclusion of a declaration. Today it was not just a check that burned. An old, biased system burned with it. and we will build something better." Those words shook the room, not because they were loud, but because of their weight. And everyone knew, from this moment forward, no Hudson Trust branch would ever operate the same again. Because on this seemingly ordinary afternoon, justice walked in not with shouting, but with truth and dignity. The Hudson Trust Bank lobby, after Bradley signed the disciplinary contract, no longer felt like an ordinary bank. It felt like the stage of a collective awakening. The whispers of contempt were gone. The sharp, arrogant laughter of people who believed they stood above others had vanished. What remained was silence, heavy, sobering, transformative. Jordan Harris stood at the center of the lobby, not with the expression of someone who had won, but with the presence of someone in full command of himself. Because what he sought was not revenge, it was change. From this day forward, Jordan said, his voice calm, but carrying through every corner of the room, this branch will become the model for the entire Hudson Trust Bank system. He gestured toward the transaction counters, where the lights glowed against the marble, reflecting the faces of everyone witnessing this moment. Every employee will be retrained, every procedure will be rebuilt, and every customer, no matter who they are, will walk through those doors with their dignity intact. Sarah Mitchell, the only person who had acted correctly since the beginning, stood behind the counter notebook, open her eyes, bright with hope and pride for what this bank could become. Jordan continued scrolling through the tablet to the evaluation system. "We will implement the Respect Monitor system within the next 48 hours, he said. "This system will record every interaction, analyze them monthly, using both algorithms and independent experts. If it detects bias, discrimination, or improper preferential treatment, the system will flag it." A murmur rose through the room, not protest, but admiration. One male customer whispered, "Every bank should do this." Jordan glanced at him and offered a soft smile. "You are right, and we will set that standard." He approached the customer service area, where several employees had been standing timidly since the confrontation. "You are not Bradley Jordan," said gently. "Today is not about punishing everyone. Today is about rebuilding a foundation that has become unstable." Sarah nodded vigorously and wrote down every word. "There will be new training sessions," Jordan said. "Not dry lectures. Real conversations, real people, real stories, real pain." He paused, still holding the small cluster of ashes in his palm, like a symbol. "And this is why." He lifted the hand with the ashes. "The ashes of a check are not just burned money. They are burned opportunities, burned hopes, burned trust." He looked at the bowed heads before him. "But they can also be the beginning of something new." Those words struck softly but deeply, like a spark landing in every unsettled mind. Jordan walked to Sarah. "Prepare the glass display case," he said. "These ashes will go inside, and it will be placed here in the lobby where everyone can see it." Sarah whispered, "What inscription should we put on the plaque?" Jordan answered without hesitation, "The cost of assumptions." Sarah wrote it down, her hand trembling with emotion. Nearby, a middle-aged customer leaned toward his companion and murmured, "We should have known that judging so quickly always leads to disaster." The words were loud enough for several others to hear, and they nodded, cheeks flushed with shame, but also with the recognition of something greater than themselves. Jordan turned and faced Bradley, now just a shadow of the man he had been. "As for you," Jordan said, his tone firm, but no longer as sharp, "your 200 hours of community service are not a punishment, Bradley. They are an opportunity. Bradley looked up, eyes wet but free of resistance. Jordan continued. At Southside there are families like mine. Once was rejected, dismissed, misjudged. You will work with them. You will see that they are not those people. They are human beings. And if you truly open your heart, they will teach you things your job title never could. The lobby fell silent again. Someone wiped away tears. Not for Bradley, but because Jordan had transformed a moment of humiliation into a lesson in humanity. Jordan turned to the customers, raising his voice, just enough for the entire room and the live stream to hear clearly. I don't want this place to be about power. I want it to be about dignity. A wave of agreement rippled through the crowd like wind across water. Finally, Jordan lowered his eyes to the ashes once more. Today an old system burned along with that check, but from those ashes we will build something better. He closed his hand around the ashes. Not for revenge, but for change. Ashley was still live streaming, but her voice no longer held excitement. It shook softly, reverently. Everyone, I think we just witnessed history. And she was right, because from that moment on, no one left that lobby as the same person who walked in. Jordan had not only rewritten the fate of a stubborn branch manager, he had changed an entire system, a collective consciousness, and most importantly, the hearts of the people who had stood there to witness it. 6 months had passed since that fateful afternoon at Hudson Trust Bank, yet its echoes remained as vivid as if everything had happened just yesterday. In the grand lobby of the Manhattan branch, the glass display titled "The Cost of Assumptions" stood with solemn dignity on its tall stone pedestal under the warm glow of golden lights. Inside the ashes of the burned check rested on a bed of soft black velvet beside a bronze plaque engraved with the words, "Small assumptions can cause damage greater than any amount of money." Customers traveled from everywhere, not just to handle banking transactions, but to witness the symbol of change within a financial system once believed to be immovable. Some stood before the display for a long time, as if seeing their own reflection within it. Others leaned down quietly, telling their children about the moment this bank was changed forever. The entire country knew the story, and many institutions had replicated the display as a visual reminder of the price of prejudice. As for Bradley Cole, the man who once stood over those ashes with tyrannical pride, he now found himself working in a modest room at the Southside Financial Literacy Center. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, touching the faded fabric of his worn shirt. Every weekend for 26 consecutive weeks, Bradley arrived early, carrying training materials, a notebook, and an old plastic water bottle. He was no longer the arrogant man he had once been. Much of that arrogance had burned away with the ashes of the check. "Good morning," Bradley said. Patricia Johnson, the 67-year-old director of the center, her silver hair pinned neatly, and her smile warm as she entered the room with a stack of folders. "The Martinez family is waiting for you in room 3. They're worried about the small business loan that was denied yesterday." Bradley nodded, his voice, now grounded with a respect no one would have imagined half a year earlier. "Yes, I'll help them right away." When he entered the small meeting room, the young Latino couple looked up with eyes filled with both hope and the cautious fear of people who had been rejected by the system many times before. Bradley sat down, no longer leaning back with smug confidence. He bent over their paperwork, asked thoughtful questions, and explained every concept in a slower, gentler tone than he had ever used in his career. "Your debt-to-income ratio is a little high," Bradley said, but for the first time his voice carried no judgment. "But we can adjust it. I'll help you build a detailed plan." When they looked at him with gratitude, something tightened quietly in his chest, a soft ache, as if pieces of his conscience were being repaired with each conversation. After the session, Bradley stood in the hallway, looking at the wall covered in thank you cards, taped up in layers. Many of them carried his name. "Thank you, Mr. Bradley, for listening. Thank you for not treating us like numbers. Thank you for believing in us." Those words weighed on him more heavily than any accusation. They reminded him of the moment he stood over those ashes, grinding them under his heel, because he believed he was right. And he understood now that every time he helped someone access a loan, stabilize their finances, or simply feel respected, he was repairing a part of the harm he caused that day. Meanwhile, at Hudson Trust Bank, Jordan's reforms existed far beyond documents. The Dignity First protocol had become the new standard. All branches implemented recording analysis and behavioral reporting systems. Every month, open discussions on unconscious bias were held, where employees shared moments when they realized they had judged customers through tinted lenses of prejudice. One young employee admitted that he once assumed a poorly dressed man was a troublemaker. After the training, he said, "I realized I judged him the same way Bradley once did, and I don't want to become that person." Stories like that spread across the entire system. Customer satisfaction rose significantly, especially within underserved communities. And the most astonishing result, discrimination complaints dropped by more than 40% in just half a year. Jordan continued visiting the bank the way he always had, in a grey hoodie jeans and white sneakers. Older employees straightened and bowed their heads when they saw him. Newer ones instinctively treated him with respect, even before knowing who he was. Some days, Jordan stood silently before the glass display for several minutes, his hand resting lightly on the surface, as if touching a painful but necessary memory. He understood that the ashes did not symbolize loss, they symbolized rebirth. And the most meaningful form of rebirth was the change that happened inside people. As he walked out of the lobby, a few customers turned to look after him, not because he was wealthy or powerful, but because they knew they were watching a man who had transformed pain into justice, humiliation into reform, and ashes into a permanent reminder. That lesson did more than change a manager named Bradley Cole. It changed an entire industry, a community, and the hearts of those who witnessed the afternoon when a burned check ignited the flame of truth. 6 months after that suffocating afternoon at Hudson Trust Bank, the story of the burned check had not faded. Instead, it had spread across the United States like a rising current reaching financial institutions, universities, corporate seminars, sociology, classrooms, and even everyday conversations. It was no longer just a story about a man being mistreated inside a bank. It became the symbol of what people began calling fireproof worth value that cannot be burned. The image of Jordan Harris, standing in the middle of the bank lobby, raising his CEO card and unlocking the internal portal, was replayed millions of times online. The video surpassed 15 million views, was shared by news programs, podcasts, TED-style talks, and became a case study in courses on social justice. No one watched it without seeing a part of themselves somewhere in the story sometimes, as Jordan, sometimes as Bradley, and sometimes as the silent witnesses standing by. But the most important part was not the number of views. It was the changes that moment set in motion. Major banks like North River Financial, Atlantic Federal, and Sunline Trust contacted Hudson Trust to request permission to implement the Dignity First protocol across their systems. Companies in retail healthcare and customer service also asked to adopt versions of the Respect Monitor system for their employees. A CEO in the aviation industry said, "We cannot wait for our own Hudson incident before we change." Jordan did not appear on television to boast about what happened. He rejected most interview requests. The only invitations he accepted were from small schools, community-run minority conferences, or ethics and leadership classes. Everywhere he went, he repeated the same message. Silence in the face of injustice is the doorway to greater injustice. And listeners fell silent afterward, not out of admiration, but because they were confronted by their own reflections. At Hudson Trust, the change extended far beyond new procedures and newly installed cameras. It seeped into the culture. Employees began noticing small moments they had once ignored: the way they greeted customers, how they looked at someone wearing old clothes, how they spoke to an elderly woman who struggled with English, or how they judged a young person withdrawing a large sum. People became more careful, more considerate, not because they feared punishment, but because they understood that small actions can inflict lasting harm. One day, Jordan visited the branch unexpectedly. Everyone recognized him, even though he still wore his familiar grey hoodie. But what made him pause was not the polite greetings of the staff. It was the sight of a young teller patiently helping an elderly immigrant man navigate an international transfer, speaking with a voice soft as a breeze. Jordan watched for a long moment before walking toward the cost of assumptions display. He placed his hand on the glass, looking at the ashes inside, tiny grey fragments, yet carrying the weight of a revolution. Was it worth it? An older customer beside him asked hesitantly. Jordan turned, smiling gently. Yes, because sometimes one painful moment can change an entire generation. The customer nodded, understanding more in that instant than from any lecture. During those 6 months, Bradley Cole continued working at Southside, but no one forced him. When his 200 mandatory hours ended, he kept coming. Every week, without pay, without obligation, with no one expecting him, but he still came. One day, he met Jordan in the center's small office. Jordan asked, "You're still continuing?" Bradley nodded. "I think I still have a lot to fix." Jordan tilted his head. "Not because I made you." Bradley shook his head softly. "No, because I need to become the man I should have been years ago." Jordan placed a hand on his shoulder, not as a superior, but as someone who understood that rebirth always comes with repentance. "Good," Jordan said. "The door to change is always open to anyone willing to walk through." By then, people realized the Hudson Trust story no longer belonged to a single man. It became an educational movement in universities. Sociologists used it to analyze the chain reactions of prejudice. Corporate leaders used it to train employees on integrity. Parents told their children the story as a living example of the importance of respect. And everyone who watched the video thought about the last time they judged someone based on appearance or on a fleeting assumption. The story kept spreading, not carried by flames but by awakening. Jordan Harris never considered himself a hero. When asked how he managed to remain so calm, he simply said, "I don't need to raise my voice to prove my worth. Real worth can't be burned." And that was the core of everything. The burned check became a paradoxical symbol. The material was destroyed, but dignity was not. The man who set it on fire fell into the abyss of arrogance. But the man who was burned by it ignited a reform unlike anything seen before. When Jordan left the community center on a breezy autumn afternoon, a group of high school students ran up to ask for a picture, explaining that they were studying the Hudson case in their civic leadership class. Jordan smiled, neither accepting nor refusing. He just said, "If there's anything to learn from that day, it's this: never judge someone by what you see on the surface. That part is wrong more often than you think." A girl asked, "Then what part is right?" Jordan looked into the glass display in his mind, where the ashes still lay, and answered, "What's right is what people choose to do when they hold power, and also when they no longer have it." The wind passed through, carrying a feeling both gentle and profound. That day the check burned, but from its ashes a new system was built, one rooted in respect, fairness, and human dignity. And as Jordan once said, they can burn the check, but they cannot burn true worth. And that is what made this story more than an incident. It became a living lesson, a movement, and a reminder that sometimes, from the deepest pain, the most beautiful things emerge. From the perspective of a specialist in organizational culture and social behavior, Jordan Harris's story reveals a timeless truth. Real power is not the loudest voice in the room, but the ability to maintain dignity when treated unfairly, and to use that very experience to reshape an entire system. What made the moment at Hudson Trust Bank historic was not the dramatic twist of a prejudiced employee unknowingly insulting the bank's chairman, but the way Jordan chose to respond without hatred, without retaliation, transforming humiliation into momentum for reform, turning ashes into a lesson, and turning wrongdoing into the starting point of meaningful change. That is the essence of leadership, not using authority to strike back, but to elevate an entire system, giving those who erred a chance to correct themselves, and those who stood by a chance to awaken. And if this story resonates with you, please like the video to help spread the message of dignity and responsibility in our modern world. Subscribe to continue following these journeys, where justice is not a shout, but a steady and compassionate resolve. Before leaving the video, leave a short comment as a reminder to yourself and to our community: hold your dignity.